Hey guys, it's Chad from the Teach Better team, and I am here with the amazing Jared Hamilton, who just led a fantastic Teach Better chat on going gradeless. I'm super stoked to talk to him, so let's get this going. Jared, how are you, my friend?
I'm doing really good. We're almost done the teaching year. We have some gorgeous weather. I think you got up to 102 where we are right now.
Wow.
It's just been really, really good experiences today and this week.
Absolutely. So that was a fantastic chat, by the way. I loved your questions. It made me just feel great about it. You ever get yourself in a room where a bunch of people kind of start echoing some of the amazing things you wish more people would echo, and you're like, there's hope. That's kind of what I felt like the chat did for me. Because we work with schools and districts across the country, but like having this nucleus of like innovation and progressive thinking all in one place, and just hearing you lead that charge tonight was absolutely fantastic. So that was my perspective from tonight. How are you feeling after the chat?
I felt really good by it. I mean, the biggest thing for me, I think, is just when you see the dialogue in the chat. I mean, I got to be honest, my hands are tired from trying to keep up with things and responding and looking at answers like yes, yes, and then I'm still going to be looking back there. I think a little bit there, but I just think the like you were saying when you hear that echo was that common theme where everyone's nodding along like we get this, but you also got that, well, we can do this. Like, I can do that. Like, yeah, like I can not grade as many things that my kids give in. And you know what? I can give more descriptive feedback. So like, let's make the outcome rather than a bunch of percentages and collection of marks. Let's make it more about, we have these standards. What have you completed? What can you do? How well can you do them? And that for me is the excitement, because then you start thinking, okay, we're not only are we onto something here, but you're starting to hear that we have an action plan. So now it's just, okay, what's holding us back? Let's do this.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that, and I love it. So the topic tonight, in case you're just joining or just coming in, was going gradeless. Now, to me, like the whole idea of going gradeless has so much stuff, like good stuff built into it, right? So that like we could be here for hours. We won't. I won't keep you for that long. But I feel like we could have a multi-hour conversation about this, just because there's so much into it. But when we talk about going gradeless, if a teacher's just coming in and hearing this for the first time, give them an overview of what going gradeless means to you, and maybe what some of other people see gradeless as being, based on the chat tonight.
When I usually talk about going gradeless, when I get a chance to speak to other educators, I always try to use my story. The reason I started looking at this was because I was doing these amazing projects in mathematics where students were building 3D models, dioramas, posters, and we would go over weeks of this, like fix this, do this. And I always felt like we were having good like dialogue. The kids were taking feedback and improving. But at the end, it was like they gave me all these projects. I gave them a little slip of paper with a mark on it. And then it was like, take your projects home. And the kids would be looking at me weird, like, no, you keep them, Mr. Hamilton, they're yours. And if I did make them take them home, I'd look outside my room, they'll be in the garbage can. And that just drove me nuts. Like, there's something wrong here, that they made this and that's what they did with it, that all they cared is they got an A+ or a B+. So for me, about going gradeless was saying, I got to flip this and say, I don't want them caring about that grade anymore. I want them caring about what they made, what they did with their learning, how they learned. So when I think of going gradeless, the big thought that goes through my mind is getting these kids to care more about our students, to care more about their learning rather than the end assessment, that end target.
Yes.
Like, what did you actually accomplish here? What is your progression?
Right.
What were your feelings about this? Like, let's talk about how excited you were about this, how much happiness it brought you.
I love that, man.
And even just like the work model, like, did you feel recognized for what you did here? Like, these are the things from, like, these are the skills, like, that's what I want you taking to universities when you start writing your application letters, or if you're going into a job, this is what I want you thinking about.
Yeah, and because it's really about that process, right? I was literally just visiting with Alex Valensek, who's actually watching right now, and his team in Illinois. Like literally this past week, we were talking about PBL, which is just what you're talking about right now. And one of the big takeaways from that training that I was trying to get the teachers to understand is the fact that it's not only about the end, it's about the process, right? So to your point, if a student doesn't give you that big thing at the end, but has learned a lot in the process of not fully completing it, we can still measure what they've learned, right? It's not like an all or none principle. But in this traditional mindset, I've seen teachers go, well, they didn't turn in the project, they get a 0, right? Or they get an F. When I go, well, did they learn anything from doing some of the project? Can you measure that? Right? Like, can you give them feedback on that process? So let's talk about, I think we probably both talk to educators about these topics a lot. So some of the pitfalls that I kind of see educators highlighting when we have these conversations, they go, well, you've already alluded to some of this, but sometimes I feel like when we say going gradeless, what people hear is you never give the student anything, any feedback, anything else, right? So to me, that's completely incorrect. But I'd like to hear your thoughts on, like, if someone hears gradeless and goes, so it's just a free for all, they just like learn in this like hippie commune and just like love and life kind of deal, right? Like, or is it like, how important is feedback? When is that feedback being provided? And what role does that play in a gradeless classroom?
I mean, when I think of gradeless, I mean, I think about getting into this idea that the feedback and the conversation is the most important part of any assessment task. And then the idea is when you lead with that, it's similar to what you just said, Chad. It doesn't matter how far they get or how much work they do. We can always give them something, and we can always report on something. So what have you done well? What could you do next? And for me, like, it's an in the moment thing. Like, I think a pitfall that I encounter a lot with teachers is that, okay, well, I get all these papers and I'm going to mark them all and I'm going to give them back to the kids, and they're just going to look at the grade and they're going to ignore all my comments. I don't want to do that anymore. So then it's like, okay, so how about you don't give them the grade? Oh, but they need that. I'm like, no, but hear what I'm saying. Like, give them that feedback in the moment while they're doing it. Keep the conversations alive.
I love that.
And it's like, oh, well, I do that. And it's like, yeah, so do more of that.
I want everyone to remember that tactic, right? Hide the grade to keep the conversation going. I love that. Okay, you can continue, but I wanted everyone to kind of write that down really quick because I think that's fantastic.
But it's just keep them moving, keep talking to them in the moment. Give them, like, if you're going to do rubrics, that's why if I'm using a rubric, I want my students to have it at the beginning so they can keep going back to it. So then again, you start moving from, well, they know you're learning and where you are because I'm speaking to you, but you start learning the language of rubrics. So I want you to talk with your peers and learn where you are. I want you to look at it yourself and say, well, where do I think I am? This is what I should be doing. And then I become more of the, like, that check mark. And then we start doing those things. And to me, where the grade becomes the powerful part is when this is like, I kind of like how you say it, like the grade is obvious. The grade book isn't broken. The grade is obvious. We all know what the grade is. I shouldn't have to tell an A student that they're an A student. They're listening to the feedback. They're looking at the rubrics. They're thinking of all the conversations. They know they're doing good. They don't need to wait till the end where I write 95% in red ink and then say, here you go. You know what you got.
To quote David Schmidow, he often says, a grade is just a representation symbolically of feedback the student has already received and already understands, right? So so all you're suggesting is the grade's not necessary because the feedback's where the value is in the first place, right? And the student's already aware of their learning, their progress, and their growth, or their level of mastery on a given content. They inherently understand this based on the conversation and the feedback. So the grade becomes an arbitrary afterthought. I also love, sorry, go ahead.
It's like you said, it's building the culture. Like, we as teachers know what we're doing. We build the behavior we want in our classroom so they learn, and the kids buy into it because they know it works.
Yeah.
We set up our standard for when we want to see homework done, or we set a standard for behavior in the hallways. They always buy into it. So this is the same thing. You just got to set that standard with them, that this is what matters when we learn. This is what learning looks like. This is what feedback is about. This is what assessment is. And when you get that going with them, they buy into it. And they stop looking for that. Well, teacher, tell me what my percentage was, or can you tell me if I'm the top student in the class? They start looking for the comments. They start looking for their growth instead.
I love that. You're training them to look for the right things, right? You're training them to value. And so this is another important thing that I often talk to educators about is students will value what you value. So if you value the grades, they will value the grades. But if you value and build the culture around the feedback, they will inherently value that more. And it's not going to happen overnight, right? It takes a minute for them to make that transition, because if they're a 10th grade student, they've been in this game for nine years already. So there is that transition, but I absolutely believe you that, hey, another thing I often think about grades is that I find grades as so final, if that makes sense. So like I view grades as like an autopsy, right? So like, this is what you're going to know. Or, an analogy I often use is like a grade is like a picture of a student in time and how much they knew at that given moment about a given topic, right? And if we perceive grades to be as important as they have been societally over the last 100 years in the broken system that we live in, work in, right? So like, if we've taken this snapshot, if you took a snapshot of me or you at the age of 20, right? And it was a human snapshot. And we said, these are our political views. These are our views on life. These are our views on parents and children and society and teaching, or whatever those things look like. And I said, and I met you today, and I said, Jared, you are the same person that is in this picture, and you have not changed at all, right? That would be ridiculous. However, we do this with grades. Like, we go, well, you got a B in 7th grade math, so you will always have a B in 7th grade math. You will always know 85% of algebra 1, right? And it's so funny to me.
And I love that comment you made about the autopsy. A colleague of mine made this quote, I use it all the time, that a report card is like an autopsy. The learning is dead, and we're trying to find out what went wrong.
Yeah, it's an investigation.
Like it's right? it's at the point. And it is like, and that's one of the big things I emphasize, that the learning is live. When we know learning is live, so that's when it has to happen. In those moments, we have to have conversations with our students. We have to have portfolios, so they have something physical that they can look at and reference. And of course, we can reference too. I mean, that's kind of like training the kids to go back and look at evidence.
Right.
And then we got to use various forms of conferences. We got to get the students talking to each other. We have to talk with them. We have to have aligned conferences. And this is the information that they're going to use that's going to give them an accurate picture of where their learning is at, and what their next steps are to get to the next level.
Yeah. And, you mentioned this in the chat tonight, and there was a lot of discussion about self-assessment, right? And I think that's where a lot of what you're alluding to goes. You can easily go to a student and say, what is your current level of mastery, and how would you describe that on a given statement? And most of the time, regardless of what most people think they'll say, they are going to be very honest. And if they're not, it's okay too. Because you can literally go, why do you think you're currently at that level? Show me evidence or proof, or demonstrate in verbally or visually or based on the work that you've done that you deserve, that you have earned the place of mastery that you are giving yourself, right?
And that's what I really like. I mean, this kind of happened in the chat. A few folks said this, but one thing for me, I think I'm there to help. I always do, but it always drives me nuts in the back of my brain as an educator. So when you get that kid who's like, they come up to you and say, teacher, I really need an A. I've got a B plus. What extra credit project can I do to get that? And I think to myself, that is not the reason you should be doing this. You shouldn't be just doing more work so you get
No.
that end grade. You should be doing more work so you gain an extra skill. So again, for me, it comes down to when you're doing this in the moment, it's just like you said, get the students self-reflecting, get us reflecting with them. So you change the flip from, I want to do more work or I need to do more learning so I get this grade to, I want to do more learning because I want to have this skill set. I want to know how to use Pythagorean theorem and trigonometric problems. I want to look at some of these higher outcomes you're talking about because I want to go into pre-calculus and I think this is going to help me rather than the grade.
Right. Or you can even simplify that conversation. And then if a teacher understands how they're measuring student mastery using depth of knowledge or different action sort of items, right? So going to that same student and going, well, the reason you have a B plus is, or a B or whatever arbitrary letter we're assigning to your level of mastery, the reason you have that is because you can solve single step or you can solve a process, but you can't compare, contrast, or defend your mathematical reasoning of what you're doing. When you can do that, I can give you an A because that meets the needs of the standard that we're working towards, right? So I think there's another component on the student side. Absolutely, we need to build that capacity, but on the teacher side, we also have to know where are we headed, what degree of mastery do we need the students to show, and how can we lead students and scaffold the learning and conversation to lead them into that right path, right? So I think it just opens up so many great components of pedagogy when you focus on that feedback, because if you don't understand the direction or objectives or where you're trying to get the student to go, it's really hard to give good feedback on where they are.
And for me, it's that framework. Like for me, I look at differentiation and universal design for learning. Differentiation is a teacher-led process. We know the benefits of it, but in the same sense, we know where some of the pitfalls come in. If we do too much of it, like we're working harder than our students, we're exhausting ourselves. But when you build all those steps and frameworks you said, and then you get the students jumping in, well, now the students know the pathway. They know what to do. Now the universal design for learning comes in. They start taking over. And then we come from the drivers of the learning. We're now the facilitators. We're the guiders. We're the mentors. And they start doing the lifting while we start supporting them.
I love that you just said that. One of my favorite phrases is, if you walk into a classroom and the teacher's working harder than the students, something's wrong. Something's broken in that classroom.
I don't care. Like, I've been a part of 5 different teaching environments in my life, strong cultures, and the ones where we did not have a lot of these well-being issues that we all talk about nowadays was when we came into schools and we said the students are doing the work. These were the teachers who were like, we're not having these burnout issues or problems. But when we came into these areas where you had these teachers were like, they were work. I just saw them and I loved it. But it's like, you can't maintain this. Like you can't. You can't.
It's not.
So we got to flip it. We got to flip this. We need something here extra to help you out.
Right. Is active learning happening in the classroom, or is it all on your shoulders as the educator? Like, that's a big question a lot of teachers need to ask themselves is, if your students left the room, would your lesson change? Or are you doing all of the work in this situation? Because if that's true, like, something's wrong with that scenario, right? Oh, man. This is such a fun conversation. I don't want to keep you here all night, though. So let's get into some of the nuts and bolts of this. If I'm a teacher, I'm watching this and I'm like, you know what? Jared's kind of like changing my mind about a couple things, and I'm feeling pretty good about this. And what are some first steps? And I know you have a great thing that I already commented on in the chat, but I'd love for you to say it again. What are some first steps that a teacher can take going from a purely, I'm given 5 points for every single thing under the sun, 100-point scale, A through F, just bread and butter, traditional grading. And they're like, you know what? This makes sense to me. What are some steps? Because I'm assuming you would agree with the statement that you don't have to do all of this overnight, right? So what are some first steps that someone could take to start working towards this process?
My biggest statement is the first step to Gradeless is grading less.
Yeah. Love that.
Stop putting a grade on everything. If you're in an environment right now, and I believe me, like I know this because I was there in my first 5 years of teaching. It was my next 3 years of teaching where I started to say, this is nuts. I don't want to keep this up anymore. There's got to be a better way. If you think like in a term or like a 4-week period, you're grading 30 pieces, grade 20. Like that to me is the best start.
That's the
grade
first
20.
step. Right. I love it. The first step to going gradeless is grade less. I love that. That's great. That's fantastic. I might steal that and quote you some point in a training, I think. I'll give you credit. No worries. So yeah, no, that's fantastic. So what are some options? So going gradeless looks different for a lot of people, right? It doesn't look the same for probably any two people that do it, necessarily in their classroom. So what are some sort of non-negotiables in your mind of a high quality gradeless classroom? So what are some pillars that you think exist regardless of differences in style or execution? What are some pillars that people can lean on to really foundationally build a high quality gradeless classroom?
I think 3 of the pillars that I work with the most is to look at building a portfolio and having a lot of project-based learning, giving the kids a physical, tangible, something they can think about different from, say, like a test or a quiz. It's got a story, it's got a journey, there's lots of follow-up with it. The second part I tend to look at is having regular conferences with your students. And again, like, I don't think there's a set way to do this. You're the teacher, you know best. There's times where like I have conferences, my classes are pretty normal, so I regularly see them. There's times I look and say, Johnny's going to get 4 conferences because Johnny needs 4 conferences. Timmy's doing amazing. I had to talk to him for 2 minutes. He knows what he's doing. So why would I go have another conference with him? This is where I need to focus myself. And I think the third one is, it kind of comes into that tweet I said about those reflective questions. I always ask my students this in a gradeless assessment. Like, are you feeling pride in your work? Is there a passion here that you're getting?
Yeah.
Do you feel acknowledged for this? Like, am I commenting to you enough in one form
Which
or
now
another?
we're touching on even some like whole child SEL stuff, right?
Yeah. Absolutely. And it builds that into, and then other parts there, like what joy and happiness is this bringing you? Like, I'm sorry, like there's too much mathematics. I'm a math teacher, so there's too much mathematical mindset going out right now that these kids need to be having a wonderful experience with their mathematics. Like, it's not just about getting the A's and everything. It's a statistic. It drives me nuts, but we always talk about this in a lot of my meetings where it's, we went and we got all these adults who got straight A's in math from the last 40 years. 86% of them, if we asked them to do more math, answered no. So I'm sorry, but there's something wrong with that when you start hearing answers like that. And then it comes in just that last part where I like bringing in that, where do you see yourself in this? Like, there's a story here in mathematics. It's diverse. It's all over the world. There's so many different ways to do it. It's not just a standard algorithm. Where do you come into this? And to me, like, that is the final pillar that I really focus on the most, is making sure the students are making those personal and social and emotional connections to this whole picture of gradeless learning and assessment.
I love it, man. It's fantastic. So where can people find you, reach out to you, find your thoughts in the world?
The best place I am right now is Twitter. That's Mr. Make Math Sense. I post a lot of my project there's and ideas. Easiest way is just to do a follow. I love extending my PLN, follow back, but also just to reach out. I mean, I'm more than happy to share anything I make. But again, I usually take the fundamentals because I feel this is how it was taught to me once upon a time. Is I don't necessarily want it to be like, hey, you asked me, here's my lesson on doing like Super Mario Maker and using this for PBL and gradeless. I want you to think about what I'm doing like with Pokemon Go and statistics, and now think, okay, there's something I really care about and I'm passionate about, but I see the big fundamental elements you're talking about here. So I'm going to do this with my project because this is what I want to bring to my students. And again, I'm there to answer questions and reflections, just like I've had mentors in the past do for me, to say, well, how about this? Or would you do this instead? Or what do you expect the students to get from this? Or like, what's the big picture you really want?
I love it, man. I appreciate you being so open and willing to, help out people as they have these burning questions, as they go through the chat and the record of these conversations. That is absolutely fantastic. Jared, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to hang out with me tonight. I feel like we need to talk again very soon just because this was awesome. So let's do this again shortly at some point in the future. And have a fantastic night, my friend.
Thank you, Chad.